I stood alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by 12 perfectly set places that would never be filled. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the pristine white tablecloths, each one a monument to my foolishness. I had spent thousands of dollars on this dinner, carefully selecting the menu, arranging the flowers, choosing the wine. Everything was perfect except for one crucial detail: no one was coming. My phone buzzed on the table, the notification cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife. It was from my father, Robert Vance. The message was brief, almost casual in its cruelty. "Don't expect anyone to come. We have plans already." My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen, already knowing what I would find but unable to stop myself from looking. Social media has a way of amplifying pain, making private humiliation devastatingly public. There they were, all of them, frozen in a moment of perfect happiness that deliberately excluded me. My father, my mother Sandra, my brother Michael, and my aunt Patricia, all beaming on the deck of a luxury yacht somewhere in Street Barts. The caption read, "Finally reunited," with a row of heart emojis that felt like tiny daggers. Finally reunited. As if I had been dead to them. As if my 38th birthday meant nothing. As if the years I had spent building them up had never happened. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at that photograph, trying to understand how I had become so invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. The waiter approached hesitantly, his professional smile faltering as he took in the scene. One woman, 12 empty chairs, and a table full of food that no one would eat. "Ma'am, should we perhaps wait a bit longer?" he asked gently, his kindness almost unbearable in that moment. "No," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "They're not coming. They were never going to come." I pulled out my laptop from my bag, the familiar weight of it grounding me in something real, something I could control. Right there, in that ridiculous restaurant with its overpriced champagne and pitying staff, I logged into my property management accounts. My fingers moved with precision, clicking through screens I knew by heart. I froze every account, every benefit, every financial lifeline that connected my family to the empire I had built. If they wanted to celebrate without me, they could do it on their own dime. The anger that surged through me in that moment was clarifying, almost pure. For years I had told myself that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water, that love meant sacrifice. But sitting there in that empty room, I finally understood the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. My family had not just forgotten my birthday. They had staged a deliberate, public rejection, documenting their togetherness in a place I could never afford to take them, using money that somehow they had found despite their constant claims of financial struggle. I had always been the one who fixed things, the one who solved problems, the one who wrote the checks. At 23, fresh out of college with a degree in business and a fierce determination to prove myself, I had started buying properties in Charleston. Small ones at first, fixer-uppers in neighborhoods that were just beginning to turn around. I worked 16-hour days, learned to negotiate with contractors, studied market trends until my eyes burned. While my brother Michael was still figuring out what he wanted to do with his life, I was building something real. By the time I was 30, I owned a portfolio of residential and commercial properties that generated steady income. I had made it, or so I thought. But success, I learned, comes with expectations, especially from family. My parents had been so proud at first, showing my photo to their friends, bragging about their daughter, the real estate mogul. But pride quickly transformed into entitlement. Within a year of my first major success, they had moved into one of my luxury apartments in downtown Charleston, a 3-bedroom unit with views of the harbor that would have rented for $4,000 a month on the open market. I charged them $800. A family discount I assured myself was reasonable. They paid late every month, and I never charged the late fees. My father had worked in middle management at a manufacturing company before retiring early, always talking about how he had provided for us, how he had given us opportunities. My mother had been a part-time bookkeeper, more interested in garden club meetings and social status than actual work. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, or should have been. Yet somehow, their lifestyle expanded to match my success. The car I helped them buy when their old sedan died became a luxury SUV. The occasional dinner I treated them to became an expectation of fine dining several times a month. The emergency fund I set up for them somehow needed constant replenishment. Michael was worse. My older brother by 3 years, he had always been the golden child, the son my father had wanted, the heir to a legacy that existed only in my father's imagination. Michael had drifted through his 20s, trying his hand at various ventures that never quite worked out. Marketing consultant, life coach, business advisor, each title more impressive and less substantial than the last. When he announced he was starting a consulting firm, my father had been ecstatic. Finally, his son was going to be a success, a man of importance. The fact that Michael's consulting firm existed only on paper seemed irrelevant to everyone but me. I had given him office space in one of my commercial properties, a generous suite that he had decorated expensively and used rarely. He held meetings there occasionally, always with people who seemed more like friends than clients, always ordering catered lunches and craft beer that appeared on my building's expense account. I had audited the costs once, a moment of clarity that I quickly suppressed. Michael's office was costing me nearly $3,000 a month after factoring in the lost rental income, the utilities, and his liberal interpretation of what constituted business expenses. But Michael had mastered the art of performance. He dressed in expensive suits, drove a leased BMW, and spoke confidently about his clients and his deals. At family dinners, he would hold court, sharing carefully vague stories about his successes, while my father beamed with pride. My mother would turn to me and say things like, "Isn't it wonderful how well Michael is doing? And he's accomplished all of this on his own, built it from nothing." The implication was clear. My success was somehow less impressive because I had started with real estate, something tangible and understandable. Michael was creating something abstract and therefore more valuable in their eyes. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, had moved to Charleston 5 years ago after a divorce that left her bitter and broke. She had taken up residence in my guest room, a temporary arrangement that had become permanent through sheer inertia. Patricia had a gift for spending money, particularly other people's money. The credit cards I had added her to for emergencies had become her personal shopping funds. Weekend trips to boutiques in Atlanta, spa days, theater tickets, expensive cosmetics that promised to turn back time. When I had gently suggested she might want to contribute to household expenses, she had looked wounded and reminded me that family was supposed to support each other, especially when someone was going through a difficult time. Her difficult time had lasted 5 years and showed no signs of ending. Through all of this, I had told myself I was being generous, that this was what family did. I ignored the small voice that whispered I was being used, that love should not feel this much like a transaction. I had David, my boyfriend of 2 years, who saw things more clearly than I did. David was a mechanic, the kind of man who came home with grease under his fingernails and honest exhaustion in his eyes. He owned his own auto shop, worked hard, treated his customers fairly, and had never asked me for a single thing except my company and my honesty. My family despised him. They never said it directly, of course. That would have been too crude, too obvious. Instead, there were the little comments, the casual cruelties delivered with smiles. My mother asking when I was going to meet someone more suitable, someone with ambition. My father suggesting that a mechanic was fine for some people, but surely I wanted someone who could match my success, someone who moved in the same circles. Michael had been the worst, making jokes about blue-collar work, asking David at family dinners if he had any interesting stories about changing oil, laughing in a way that made it clear he thought David was beneath us all. At least Michael's work brings pride to the family, my mother had said once, when I had mentioned that David was expanding his business. The words had cut deeper than she perhaps intended, or maybe exactly as deep as she meant. Michael's phantom consulting firm that existed on my charity was a source of pride, but David's actual business, built with his own hands and sustained by his own reputation, was something to be embarrassed about. I had defended David, of course, but weakly, always worried about causing conflict, always trying to keep the peace. David never complained, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way he became quieter around my family, the way he found excuses not to attend gatherings. He had told me once, after a particularly brutal family dinner, that I needed to decide who I was going to be. The person my family wanted me to be, or the person I actually was. I had not understood what he meant at the time. Now, sitting in this empty restaurant, I was beginning to. The weeks leading up to my birthday had been typical, which meant they had been exhausting. Michael had called 3 times asking for help with his rent, even though he lived in an apartment I owned and paid below market rate. My mother had needed money for my father's medication, money that somehow never made it to the pharmacy but did make it to the country club for their annual membership renewal. Patricia had maxed out 2 of the credit cards I had given her and needed me to pay them off so her credit score would not suffer. Each request came with the same implicit message: this is what family does, and if you loved us, you would not hesitate. I had hesitated, though, more and more lately. I had started keeping a spreadsheet, something I had never done before because looking at the numbers too closely felt like an accusation. But I had looked, and what I saw had shocked me. In the past 5 years, I had given or loaned my family over $100,000. That did not include the subsidized rent, the office space, the utilities, the credit cards, the cars, the vacations I had funded indirectly by paying for things so they could afford their trips. When I added everything up, the number was closer to $200,000. $200,000, and they could not be bothered to show up for my birthday. $200,000, and they were on a yacht in Street Barts, living a life I had subsidized while publicly excluding me from their happiness. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. The anger had crystallized overnight into something harder and more durable: resolve. I spent 3 hours at my desk, drafting documents that should have been drafted years ago. Formal rental agreements with market rate pricing and 30-day notice periods. Itemized statements of loans and debts. termination notices for credit cards. Everything legal, everything documented, everything fair by any standard except the one my family had invented, where fairness meant I gave endlessly and asked for nothing in return. I sent the emails before I could second-guess myself. The rental notices went to my parents, to Michael, to Patricia. The debt statements went to everyone who owed me money, with a payment schedule and interest calculated at the legal rate. The credit card companies received my calls, and within an hour, the cards I had guaranteed were frozen and would be canceled within the billing cycle. I felt something loosen in my chest with each action, as if I were cutting strings that had been pulling me in too many directions for too long. David called me that afternoon. I had texted him the night before, after I left the restaurant, a simple message that said I needed to talk. He arrived at my house with takeout from my favorite Thai place, not because it was a special occasion, but because he knew I probably had not eaten. This was who David was: practical, thoughtful, present in ways that mattered. I told him everything, the whole humiliating story of the birthday dinner, the social media post, the financial reckoning I had begun that morning. He listened without interrupting, his hands warm around his coffee mug, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I'm not surprised. I'm sorry this happened, but I'm not surprised. Your family has been taking advantage of you for as long as I've known you, probably longer. The question is, what are you going to do now?" "I've already started," I said, and explained the notices, the debt statements, the frozen credit cards. David nodded slowly. "Good," he said simply. "Sometimes you have to stop rescuing people who don't want to be rescued. Sometimes you have to let people face the consequences of their choices. That's not cruelty, that's clarity." His words settled over me like a benediction. Clarity. Yes, that was exactly what I had found in that empty restaurant. Clarity about who my family really was, about who I had allowed myself to become in relation to them, about what love actually meant versus what I had been calling love. 3 days later, they came. I had known they would, had been preparing myself for it. The knock on my door came in the afternoon, aggressive and demanding. I opened it to find my father, my mother, and Michael standing there, their faces a mixture of anger and disbelief. Patricia, I noticed, had stayed away, perhaps sensing that she had even less ground to stand on than the others. They pushed past me into my living room, the space I had carefully created as a sanctuary, filling it with their indignation. My mother was crying, or pretending to cry, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had brought with her, clearly planning to deploy tears as a weapon. My father's face was red, his jaw tight. Michael looked both angry and nervous, which should have warned me that something was wrong, but I was too focused on maintaining my composure to notice. "Chelsea," my mother began, using my childhood nickname as if it could summon the girl I used to be, the one who always gave in. "Are you really going to destroy this family over a birthday party? Is that what we've come to? You're so hurt that you missed one celebration that you're willing to tear apart everything we've built together?" The audacity of it took my breath away. One celebration. As if the birthday was the problem and not years of exploitation. As if they had built anything together with me when I had been the only one building while they took. "Mom," I said, my voice calm in a way that seemed to unsettle her, "this is not about the birthday. This is about the fact that you were not just absent, you were deliberately somewhere else, somewhere expensive, somewhere you could afford only because I've been subsidizing your life for 5 years. My father stepped forward, his body language aggressive in a way that would have made me back down a year ago, a month ago, maybe even a week ago. But something had shifted in me. I stood my ground. "We built you, Eleanor," he said, dropping the nickname now that sweetness had failed, using my full name like an accusation. "Everything you have, everything you've accomplished, is because of us. We raised you, we gave you opportunities, we supported your dreams. Your success is our success. We're a family, and family shares." "You didn't build me," I said quietly. "I paid the bills, I kept the lights on, I made the investments, took the risks, did the work. You just withdrew money from the account." The metaphor was so perfect, so precise, that I saw him flinch. Good, he should flinch, they all should. Michael moved closer, trying a different tactic. His voice was softer, reasonable, the voice he probably used with the clients he claimed to have. "Eleanor, look, I know I've been struggling. The consulting business is tough. It takes time to build a client base. But you can't just cut me off like this. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. Don't make things worse than they already are." There was something in his tone, an edge of desperation that went beyond concern about rent and office space. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. We all looked at it, that invasive rectangle of glass that had become the bearer of so much truth lately. I picked it up and felt the blood drain from my face as I read the notification. Credit alert. Loan application for $75,000 submitted in the name of Eleanor Vance. Collateral listed. Commercial properties at addresses listed below. Applicant: Michael Vance. The room went silent. I looked up at Michael, then at my parents, and saw the truth written across their faces. They had known. They had all known. This was not Michael, acting alone in desperation. This was a plan, a coordinated effort to extract more from me, to leverage my properties for cash they had no intention of earning or repaying. You knew about this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying more weight than any scream. Both of you. All of you. My mother's tears dried up remarkably quickly. Eleanor. Please. Michael is family. He needs help. We all need help. You have so much. And we're just trying to survive. Survive? The word came out like a laugh, bitter and sharp. You were on a yacht in Street Barts. That's not survival. That's luxury funded by fraud. I was already dialing the bank, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The customer service representative answered on the second ring, and I spoke clearly and calmly, identifying myself, explaining the fraudulent loan application, requesting an immediate freeze on my credit and cancellation of the application. I did all of this while my family watched, while my brother's face went from red to pale, while my father's bluster deflated into something that looked almost like fear. When I hung up, my mother tried again. Eleanor, please, don't do this. He's family. We're family. I'm family too, I said, and the words came out harder than I intended, sharp enough to cut. Or did you forget that in Street Barts? Was I family when you posted that picture? Was I family when you ignored my birthday? Was I family when Michael tried to steal from me? We weren't stealing, Michael protested weakly. I was just trying to get a loan. I would have paid you back. With what? I asked. With the money from your consulting business that doesn't exist? With the rent you can't pay? With the credit cards you've maxed out? Tell me, Michael, what exactly were you going to use to pay back $75,000? He had no answer. None of them did. They stood there in my living room. These people who had raised me and claimed to love me, and they had nothing to say that could justify what they had done, what they had been doing for years. My father tried one last time, reaching for authority, for the power he had always held over me. You're going to regret this, Eleanor. You're going to regret turning your back on your family. Mark my words. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. He was not a powerful patriarch. He was a man who had failed at building his own legacy and had spent his retirement trying to live off mine. He was small and grasping and desperate, and I had made myself smaller trying to make him feel bigger. Maybe I will regret it, I said. But if I do, at least it will be my regret. At least I'll be making my own choices instead of just funding yours. I walked to the door and opened it, a gesture that was both invitation and dismissal. Please leave. All of you. And don't come back unless you're prepared to treat me with the respect you demand for yourselves. They left, Michael first, slinking out like a chastened child, then my mother, still clutching her useless tissue, and finally my father, who paused in the doorway as if he wanted to say something more but could not find words that would carry enough weight. The door closed behind them with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. I stood in my suddenly quiet house and felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. It was fragile and new and probably temporary, but it was real. I had drawn a line, had said no, had protected myself. The guilt would come later, I knew. The second-guessing, the what-ifs, the moments of weakness when I would wonder if I had been too harsh. But for now, I just felt the relief of no longer carrying a weight I had never agreed to bear. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I hired Jennifer, an attorney who specialized in family law and financial disputes, and laid everything out for her. She listened with the kind of professional calm that comes from having seen every variation of human greed and dysfunction, and when I finished, she said simply, "You have a strong case for recovering your funds. But I want you to be prepared for the fact that getting a judgment is different from collecting on it. Your family may not have the money to pay you back." "I know," I said. "This is not really about the money. It's about making it clear that I'm not a resource to be exploited. It's about establishing that there are consequences." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Good, that's a healthy mindset. Now, there's something else you should know. In the course of reviewing your financial documents, I found a reference to a trust fund. Do you know anything about a trust established by a Margaret Vance?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Margaret Vance was my grandmother, my father's mother, who had passed away when I was 25. We had been close, or as close as we could be given that she lived in Florida and I saw her only a few times a year. She had been a shrewd woman, a widow who had managed her late husband's construction business until she sold it for a substantial profit. I remembered her as elegant and sharp-tongued, someone who did not tolerate nonsense. "I didn't know about any trust," I said slowly. "Her estate went through probate, and I thought everything had been distributed." "There was a separate trust," Jennifer explained, pulling out documents that looked old and official. "Established 3 years before her death and specifically structured to remain dormant until certain conditions were met. The trustee is a law firm in Florida, and they've been monitoring the situation as instructed. The trust is worth approximately $750,000, and according to the terms your grandmother set, it becomes accessible to you if you ever cease providing financial support to your immediate family members for a period of 90 consecutive days. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. What? Jennifer smiled slightly. Your grandmother apparently saw something in your family that concerned her. The trust documents include a letter, sealed until the conditions were met. The trustees sent it to me when I contacted them. Would you like to read it? She handed me an envelope, yellowed slightly with age, my name written across the front in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, unfolding paper that crackled with age and care. My dear Eleanor, it began, and I could hear her voice in every word. If you are reading this, it means you have finally done what I hoped you would do. You have stopped letting your family bleed you dry. I am proud of you, sweetheart, and I'm sorry I could not be there to support you in person when you made this difficult choice. I watched for years as you built yourself up, as you worked harder than anyone should have to work, as you achieved things that should have made your father burst with pride. And I watched as he and your mother and your brother took and took and took, always with smiles, always with justifications, always with the language of love and family duty. I saw what they were doing to you, and I knew that telling you would not be enough. You had to see it yourself. You had to reach your breaking point. This money is not compensation for what they took from you. It is seed money for your real life, the one you will build without them. Use it wisely. Use it to create something that brings you joy rather than obligation. Use it to surround yourself with people who love you for who you are, not what you can provide them. And use it to remember that saying no to people who hurt you is not cruelty, it is self-respect. I love you, Eleanor. I always have, and I always will, even from beyond the grave. Build yourself a beautiful life. You have earned it 1,000 times over. With all my love, Grandma Margaret. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness but from a complex mixture of grief and gratitude and relief. My grandmother had seen me, really seen me, in a way my parents never had. She had understood what was happening and had created a safety net, not just financial but emotional, a message from the past that said I was not crazy, I was not selfish, I was not wrong to protect myself. What happens now? I asked Jennifer when I could speak again. Now you wait 90 days, she said. If you maintain your boundaries, if you don't resume financial support, the trust becomes yours. The trustees will transfer the funds to an account in your name, and you can do whatever you want with it. Over the next 3 months, my family tried everything. There were phone calls I did not answer, emails I deleted without reading, messages relayed through mutual friends and distant relatives. My mother showed up at my office twice, crying in the lobby until security escorted her out. Michael left voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperate, a cycle that repeated itself weekly. My father sent a letter, formal and cold, outlining all the ways I was failing in my duties as a daughter. Each attempt hurt, but each attempt also strengthened my resolve. I had David, who was there for every moment of weakness, every time I almost picked up the phone or responded to an email. I had Jennifer, who reminded me that what I was doing was not just legal but necessary. And I had myself, a version of myself I was just beginning to meet, someone who could say no without apologizing, who could protect her own interests without guilt. I also had Ben, an old friend from my early days in real estate, who called me 3 weeks into my 90-day period with news I should have expected but somehow did not. Eleanor, I need to tell you something about Michael. He's been approaching my clients, claiming he has power of attorney over your properties, saying you're having a breakdown and he's protecting the family assets. He's trying to sell your buildings. The audacity of it should not have surprised me, but it did. Michael had failed at fraud once, and instead of retreating, he had doubled down. I called Jennifer immediately, and she moved faster than I had thought possible. Within 24 hours, she had filed cease and desist orders, had alerted every real estate broker in Charleston about Michael's fraudulent claims, and had sent copies of all documentation to the state attorney general's office. The fallout was swift and brutal. Michael's reputation, such as it was, evaporated overnight. The few real clients he had dropped him immediately. The professional network he had built on pretense and my subsidies collapsed. Within a week, he had shut down his consulting firm and, according to mutual acquaintances, moved back in with our parents in the apartment they could no longer afford. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, but I felt no guilt either. This was the consequence of his choices, the price of trying to steal from the person who had supported him longest. My grandmother had been right. Some people needed to face the results of their actions before they could learn anything at all. The 90 days ended on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 3 months after my birthday. I received a call from the trustees in Florida, confirming that the conditions had been met and the funds would be transferred to my account within 3 business days. The trust was mine, my grandmother's final gift, a vote of confidence from beyond the grave that I was doing the right thing. I spent that evening with David, sitting on my back porch with wine and takeout, watching the sun set over Charleston. We talked about the future, about dreams we had both been too afraid to voice when my life was consumed by my family's needs. David had always wanted to expand his business, to buy the building next to his current shop and create a training program for young mechanics, kids who might not have opportunities otherwise. I had always wanted to do something similar with real estate, to create affordable housing that did not sacrifice quality, to build communities rather than just profit margins. What if we did it together? I asked, the wine making me brave. What if we created something new, combined our resources and our skills? David looked at me carefully, and I could see him thinking, weighing the risks and the possibilities. Are you sure? He asked finally. Not about the business, I think that could work. But are you sure about us? About building something this significant together? Because if we do this, we're tying our lives together in ways that go beyond dating. I'm sure, I said, and I meant it. David had been steady when everything else in my life was chaos. He had never asked me for anything except honesty, had never tried to change me or control me, had never made me feel small so he could feel big. This was what partnership looked like, what love looked like when it was healthy. I want to build something with you, something that matters. We founded Vance Properties a month later, a real estate development company focused on affordable housing and community development in Charleston. David's mechanical knowledge translated surprisingly well to construction management, and his reputation for honest dealing opened doors that might have stayed closed. I brought the capital, the real estate expertise, and the network of contacts I had built over 15 years in the business. Together, we created something neither of us could have built alone. The first project was a small apartment complex in a neighborhood that was just beginning to recover from decades of neglect. We renovated 8 units, keeping the rents affordable, screening tenants carefully for people who needed a chance more than they needed charity. We hired local contractors, used local suppliers, and reinvested profits into the community. It was not the fastest way to make money, but it was the most meaningful. My family tried to contact me when they heard about the new business. There were congratulatory messages that somehow always ended with requests for money or opportunities. My mother wanted to know if there might be a job for Michael, who was having such a hard time finding work. My father suggested that family should invest in family, that he had retirement funds he could contribute in exchange for an ownership stake. Patricia sent a long email about how proud she was of me and how she had always known I would do great things, concluding with a reminder that she was still struggling financially and could use some help. I did not respond to any of them. I had learned that engaging, even to say no, was a form of permission, an acknowledgement that their requests were valid enough to warrant a response. Instead, I focused on building the life my grandmother had wanted me to have, the one I had been too afraid to imagine when I was still carrying the weight of family obligation. A year after my failed birthday party, I celebrated quietly with David, with friends I had neglected while I was busy funding my family's lifestyle, with people who showed up not because they wanted something from me, but because they genuinely enjoyed my company. We went to a small restaurant, nothing fancy, and I realized halfway through the evening that I was happy, not performing happiness, not pretending everything was fine, but actually, genuinely happy. 2 years later, Vance Properties had completed 5 projects and had 3 more in development. We had created affordable housing for 40 families, had employed dozens of local workers, and had started a scholarship program for kids in the neighborhoods where we worked. David had opened his training program, and the first class of young mechanics was graduating. We were not rich by Charleston standards, but we were comfortable, and more importantly, we were proud of what we were building. I ran into my mother once, at a grocery store, and the encounter was exactly as awkward as I had imagined it would be. She looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with the weight of choices and consequences. We made stilted small talk in the produce section, neither of us willing to address the elephant that was taking up all the space between us. "You look well," she said finally, and there was something in her voice that might have been genuine. "I'm glad things are working out for you." "Thank you," I said, because there was nothing else to say. I did not ask about my father or Michael or Patricia. I did not offer help or suggest we get together. I just accepted the observation and moved on, because that was all I could do. As I drove home that day, I thought about my grandmother's letter, about her hope that I would build a beautiful life. I had done that, or I was doing it, building something every day that reflected who I actually was, rather than who my family had needed me to be. It was not perfect, this life I had created. There were still moments of doubt, still times when I wondered if I had been too harsh, if there was some middle ground I had missed. But then I would come home to David, to the house we had bought together and renovated ourselves, to the business we were building and the community we were serving, and I would remember what my grandmother had written. Saying no to people who hurt you is not cruelty, it is self-respect. And self-respect, I had learned, was the foundation of everything else that mattered. My family had thought they were destroying me when they chose that yacht over my birthday. They thought they were punishing me when they excluded me from their celebration. But what they actually did was clear the path, remove the obstacles I had been too loyal to move myself. They tried to take my life from me, and in the end, they handed me the key to start over. I had found peace not in their apologies, which never came, or in their recognition of what they had done, which they still refused to acknowledge. I had found peace in realizing that I did not need those things. I did not need their validation or their approval or their inclusion in their carefully curated version of family. I just needed to build my own version, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and exploitation. Love is not giving until you have nothing left. Love is not sacrifice that leaves you empty. Real love, healthy love, is reciprocal and respectful and sustainable. It is what I had with David, what I was building with the friends who had stuck around, what I was trying to create in the communities where we worked. It was what my grandmother had given me in that trust fund, and that letter, the freedom to become who I was.